This is an umbrella for the start of Brollys.
Rainbows climb, clouds drift by, Brollys fly through a magic sky. Is this real? Are they dreams? Nothing appears to be what it seems. Then far away I can hear a voice in the weatherhouse call out a name. Mr. Brolly, it's time for the rain.
Harry was trying to go to sleep, but no sooner had he closed his eyes than he opened them again. Tucked up beside Harry in bed were his toys, Elephant and Hippo. Snake, as always, lay on the rug by the door, and Bird was perched on the chest of drawers. Harry stared down at his patchwork quilt. It was different from other quilts. Instead of flowery scraps of material, it was made of little embroidered pictures of rainbows, stars and planets, clouds, and great flashes of lightning in a dark and stormy sky. It had been made a long, long time ago. On the wall hung Harry's weatherhouse. If the day was going to be fine and sunny, Mrs. Brolly came to her door. If the day was going to be wet and cloudy, Mr. Brolly came out. But of course, they never came out together, for it is impossible for a day to be both wet and dry at the same time. But what would happen if they both came out together? Wondered Harry, and he sat up and stared at the weatherhouse. As he stared, the doors seemed to grow larger. His bed grew smaller, and he found himself at the entrance of the weatherhouse. A light was shining from the door, through which Harry could see Mr. Brolly no longer fixed to his wooden stand, but moving freely about the room. As Harry entered the weatherhouse, he saw Mr. Brolly doing nothing whatsoever but standing by his workbench and smiling beneath the brim of his hat. "I'm conjuring up the spring, my boy," he said. "Any moment now it will arrive in one glorious burst of flowers, birds and bees. 1, he said. 2, he went on, opening an eye and smiling at Harry. 3. A single flower in a pot suddenly appeared on Mr. Brolly's workbench. It was a very timid-looking little flower, and it hid amongst its leaves like someone who has been awakened too early and who wishes nothing more than to be allowed to snuggle back under their bedclothes. Mr. Brolly picked up the pot plant and looked at it. "And where are the rest of you, eh?" he said. The little flower hung its head. "Please, sir," it said, "they're still asleep, sir. There's only me, sir." It was exactly like a small schoolboy being questioned by a teacher. "You were supposed to be a glorious bunch of blooms, Wilkins," said Mr. Brolly. "However, since there's only you, we must do our best." "Wilkins?" said Harry. "You can't have a flower called Wilkins." At this, both Wilkins and Mr. Brolly turned their heads and looked at him. Harry laughed, for this was one of the nicest things about the weatherhouse, the way that silly and absurd things became quite ordinary, like there being flowers who could speak and who answered to the name of Wilkins. "Come along," said Mr. Brolly. "Wilkins here is going to impersonate a whole bunch of flowers, aren't you, Wilkins? A token of spring to give to Mrs. Brolly." "But it isn't spring, Mr. Brolly," said Harry. "Look." Outside, the garden showed a bleak and icy scene. "My boy," said Mr. Brolly, "this sort of thing will go on forever if one lets it. One must take matters into one's own hands. Help me conjure up the spring." Harry closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he found that he was holding a small rainbow. Mr. Brolly looked at it in silence for a moment. "Well, you tried, my boy," he said, "and that's what matters. It's not the biggest rainbow I've ever seen. It certainly isn't the brightest, but it is a sign of hope." "But, Mr. Brolly," said Harry, "I didn't try. It was just suddenly there." "Well, that's what I like about spring," said Mr. Brolly. "The suddenness of everything. Suddenly there's sunshine. Suddenly there's rain. Suddenly there's a rainbow. And suddenly," he went on, as his hat began to bob up and down on his head, "there's a thundercloud under one's hat." He tried to look pleased about this. "Oh, the silliness of spring," he said, holding on to the brim of his hat. "Leaping lambs, mad March hares." But it was as if his hat had a life of its own. Thunder rolled. Lightning flashed. At last, Mr. Brolly took his hat off. The small black thundercloud sat on his head for a moment, as if wondering what to do. Then it began to roll about the room, looking for the best place in which to have a really good thunderstorm. Being newly made, it found the whole thing very exciting, and it made a great deal of noise, considering what a very small cloud it was. "Blip," it said. "Plop." Mr. Brolly seemed not at all surprised by this. "I'm afraid he's not quite the thing," he said to Harry in a whisper. "He certainly isn't a proper thundercloud." At this, the little thundercloud hurtled across the room, knocked Mr. Brolly's hat to the ground, and threw a small thunderbolt inside. "Blip," it said, and made off to the kitchen with all speed, where Mrs. Brolly was sleeping in her chair. The little thundercloud bounced into Mrs. Brolly's lap and lay there quietly for a moment. "Blippy," it said hopefully. When Mrs. Brolly didn't wake, it drifted up to her shoulder and murmured, "Bloop," softly in her ear. Then it hovered over her head and rained down on her as hard as it could. Mrs. Brolly awoke with a start. At this moment, Mr. Brolly came into the kitchen, carrying Wilkins. "I'm trying to make the spring, my dear," he said, "and I've brought you this lovely flower." Mrs. Brolly sniffed. "Oh, all you've done, Brolly," she said, "is create a small storm cloud, which has thoroughly soaked me and a rather weedy little plant." At this, Wilkins looked very sad, and a tear ran down his petals. "Oh, do buck up, Wilkins," said Mr. Brolly, still hoping that the little flower might become a big bunch of blooms. The little flower seemed to be trying as hard as it could, until the thundercloud dashed across the room and had its noisiest storm yet, all over Wilkins. Wilkins lay down in the pot, now thoroughly soaked. And at this, the little thundercloud fell silent. "Worry," it said. "He says he's sorry," said Harry. Mr. Brolly patted the little cloud absent-mindedly. "There, there," he said. "I accept your apology." "Plop," said the little cloud, and it floated slowly towards Mr. Brolly's hat, which Mrs. Brolly had placed upside down on the kitchen table. But Mr. Brolly did not notice this. "I've tried so many times to make the spring come early," he said. "Once I wrote a letter to every child in the world explaining exactly
exactly how it was done, but nothing happened. Perhaps I forgot to post the letters, or perhaps I merely addressed them wrongly. Who can say?
"Dear Mr. Brolly," said Harry, thinking of children all over the world getting letters which they couldn't understand. They sat in silence for a time, and at last Mr. Brolly gave a deep sigh.
My boy, he said, have I forgotten spring? Have I forgotten how to make it?
A tear rolled down his cheek. "No," cried Harry, "don't be sad, Mr. Brolly. Try to remember what you put in your letter. What did it say?"
Why, said Mr. Brolly, it just said, "Dear child, whoever you are, and wherever you are."
And then he stopped.
I just can't remember, he said.
"Never mind, Brolly," said Mrs. Brolly. "Put your hat on and try again another day." Mr. Brolly put on his hat. Water cascaded down over his face and shoulders, but he seemed not to care. Harry and Mrs. Brolly looked at one another, and then they both smiled, and then they giggled, and then everyone began to laugh. Even Wilkins perked up in his pot. Mr. Brolly removed his hat, took out the little thundercloud, and gave it to Mrs. Brolly. "Worry," it said, as she tucked it away in her bag, where it went to sleep on the patchwork quilt. "You're too impatient, Brolly," said Mrs. Brolly. "The spring doesn't happen all at once."
But who makes the spring? Asked Mr. Brolly. Is it you? Or is it me?
"It's both of us," said Mrs. Brolly, putting her arms around him. "We make the spring together."
Sunshine and showers. Tears and laughter. That's what the letter said, cried Mr. Brolly. Now I remember. It said, "Dear child, think of these things. Think of sunshine and love."
And at this, the little flower, sitting in his pot on the table, burst into a whole bunch of blues.
"Oh, well done, Wilkins," said Mr. Brolly. "Well done."
Leaving them happily arm in arm, Harry went to the window, and he saw the winter garden with the bare trees. "Oh, I wish it was spring," he whispered to himself, for the winter had seemed very long. But when he looked again, he saw the tips of green leaves making their way up through the cold, hard ground. "Oh, Mrs. Brolly," he said. But when he turned from the window, he no longer saw Mr. and Mrs. Brolly sitting in their warm kitchen. He was in his own bed, under his patchwork quilt. Raindrops rattled against the window, but a moment later the sun shone brightly, and first Mr. Brolly and then Mrs. Brolly appeared in turn at the doors of the weatherhouse. Looking at them, Harry smiled, for he knew that spring was now definitely on the way.
What an absolutely beautiful programme. And Brollys will be back at the same time next week here on CBBC.